Triple H. And it's just those questions that businesses ask me on a day-to-day level. And it's surprising, considering every business out there needs to know about GST and how it works. It's quite surprising how little some businesses know. And I guess that just comes down to the whole umbrella discussion that businesses are really good at what they do. So they're really good at being the consultant in the field of what they're in. And there's some things that they have knowledge gaps in, and that's fair enough. And that's why you outsource. That's why you get good bookkeepers. That's why you get a good accountant. You don't try and do these things yourself. And with the implementation of the GST by the government, obviously a few years ago, that meant you really couldn't do it yourself, and you probably shouldn't be doing it yourself. That and payroll, I would say, are the two really confusing aspects of running a business. Payroll with it has all of the complications of making sure you're paying someone correctly according to their award, according to their entitlements, making sure that you're not unfairly dismissing them, making sure you're covering yourself to make sure you can't be taken for unfair dismissal. There's a huge, gamut of legislation that is rolled into payroll, and it makes it very confusing. And I think that's the same for GST. The only good thing I can say about GST and the impact it has on businesses is the fact that it is exactly 10%. That is really helpful. If you get an invoice and it doesn't say anything about GST on it and says it's inclusive of GST, you divide by 11, multiply by 10, and then you know the GST amount.
Easy maths.
Exactly. Divide by 11, find the GST amount. So it's, in a way, that's probably the one good thing.
Yep.
If they start increasing it to 11 or 12%, oh my God, that will do my head in.
It'll throw everyone out. Yeah. Bookkeepers everywhere will be...
Bookkeepers will get very busy very quickly. Luckily, we do have, obviously, fabulous accounting software. There's Quicken, there's Xero, there's MyOb, all of which have to and do handle the GST quite remarkably well. Luckily, again, because it's that 10% thing, it doesn't sort of make sense when you look at it. So today we're just going to be covering some tips and tricks that I have as experience as a bookkeeper with regards to ways that you can set yourself up once you start charging GST in your accounting software to make sure that you're not making errors as you go that end up having to be fixed and cost you a lot of money because your accountant has to fix them. So little tips and tricks. Also, thanks to my wonderful Facebook small business community, I have some typical questions that people have asked in relation to the GST and how it affects various purchases and various transactions with your new business. So thank you very much to those people who have asked those questions. So that's what it's all about today. It's just about what I know as to the businesses that I deal with, what their typical problems are. And if you have any questions about the GST and how it affects your business, go and see your accountant, please, or your bookkeeper. They are a wealth of knowledge. They need to know this legislation inside out and back to front. They do have, insurance to make sure that they're covering themselves, so they have the knowledge. So utilise them. Don't try and do things yourself if you're starting to charge GST as a business. So, just a quick note about last week's show as well, just while I'm thinking about money and business and things flying about. We actually talked about motivation and how to get back into the swing of things after having a lovely Christmas holiday. And since one of the great motivators in business is money, most people want to go back to work because they need the money because they haven't worked for 2 weeks. We also touched on some great budgeting tips leading up to next Christmas. Yeah, so if you remember last week we talked about little tips and tricks you can do to start saving for Christmas next year, buying what you need for Christmas next year in the sales now, and also some great budgeting tips. If you missed it, you can of course listen to my blog and podcast page on the website boydofficemanagement.com.au. But as promised, we've actually this morning uploaded those 2 budget planners that we talked about last week. They've been gratefully contributed by Steps Financial, which are a great group of North Shore mums who can help you with lots of financial services. They're available online. And also I'd like to thank my Facebook group last week, Mums on a Budget. If you do live up in this area and you are a mum, they're a great Facebook group to join. Lots of advice flying around about how to save money, buy in bulk, all those clever things that I have to say, I'm going to be totally sexist here, Jaden, but what mums do really well. Let's face it, these days... These days, mums are in charge of the budget. They're in charge of the household budget. They're definitely in charge of the household spend.
Yes.
And more, they are in charge of all the bills and everything nowadays.
I'm happy to agree with that. If I'm looking at my household, my family household, yes, I agree.
And might I say they do it very well?
Yeah, they do.
They do.
Mums do a phenomenal job.
So
we could talk a whole show about mums.
I'd love to, but let's not be overtly sexist. But that little Facebook group, Mums on a Budget, is a really great resource for just tips and tricks on saving money, especially around big events like Christmas, is what we were discussing last week. And that Steps, a financial online tool, is available on the Breakfast Date Facebook page.
Yes,
so jump on there now and have that look. You can implement that now because it's only the beginning of January, and then, it's a good little saving scheme, I think.
Yep.
So let's just start the show by talking about unpacking the GST. Now, all of this information is on the ATO website, so I am directly quoting the ATO website. Again, any questions, ask your accountant. So the GST, as we all know, is currently at 10%. It's on most goods and services in Australia. When I say in Australia, it's because if you are receiving goods or services from overseas, such as buying things online, such as buying music, you have to check that invoice to see whether or not it contains GST. And I would be checking every single invoice overseas. Yep. It's a bit of a funny one, and the only way you can know for sure is whether or not that GST, that invoice actually says GST on it. So talking about tax invoices, a valid tax invoice, and you need to be supplying this if you're charging GST to your customers. You have to tick every single one of these points. So a valid tax invoice should have the words tax invoice on it, your business name and your ABN as the supplier. And this is, if you're looking at an invoice that's coming from another supplier, this is what you should be looking for as well. The date the invoice was issued. A brief description of the items or services sold, including quantity if applicable and price. The GST amount payable, and this can be shown separately, or if the GST is exactly 1/11 of the total price, it can say total price includes GST. So you need to have that element on the invoice to show. This not only shows your customers whether or not you charge GST, which is very important when you're dealing with business-to-business transactions, but it also shows if the total includes GST or if it's excluding, or if there's another line that shows the GST, if you know what I mean. So you have to be very clear about which of the items includes GST. If the supplier does not collect GST, you have to show $0 for GST. So you have to have a line item.
It has to have that GST.
It has to have some sort of indicator, because the person who's receiving the invoice, if they're a business, they need to know whether or not they can claim back that GST. Over $1,000, it's all the same, except you've also got to have the buyer's business name and their address. So if you're selling more than $1,000 worth of goods or services, you need to include the person who's receiving the goods and services, their name and address and their ABN. So you've got to find that all out before you send them an invoice.
Okay.
So that's very important. So you become registered for GST with the ATO once your sales are over $75,000 in a financial year. Now, a lot of people think that once they approach $75,000, they need to start charging GST immediately that day. The ATO is watching your income, as is and should be your accountant, over a financial year. And you can start charging the GST when the next financial year starts, but always check these sort of questions with your accountant, because obviously if you're, sitting at about $60,000 per year, and then you know that there's an invoice coming that's going to be $50,000, it's going to push you over the top.
Yep.
You need to get that advice as to how to handle that through a mid-year. Obviously, the most logical way to start making a big change in a business accounts, starting to charge GST and being registered for it, it makes sense to do that at the beginning of a financial year. Very difficult accounts-wise to try and do it mid-year. So try and have a think about it, project what your income's going to be. If you really think you're picking up a couple of major clients and you know that your income's going to explode next year, then be on top of it and ahead of the time, make sure that you're charging
What are the repercussions to not charging GST once you get over that $75,000 mark from the ATO?
Yeah, I imagine that it's one of those things that the ATO treats in a similar way to tax offences.
Okay.
I don't know for sure, but it's a no-no. I wouldn't. It's sort of like,
risk it.
Don't risk it.
Yep.
Exactly. If you're not sure, just check with your accountant. But just keep that figure in mind. Your income, what you're invoicing out, being $75,000, not deductions, not anything else, just what you're invoicing out.
Okay.
So once you're registered for GST and not before, you can claim the GST you pay on valid sales or expenses to do with running your business off the GST liability that you have to pay to the ATO. So you calculate, you look at all those little receipts and all those things that you have received from suppliers and from, various costs of running your business, You add them all up, you take that figure off the amount that you owe the ATO, and that's what you then owe them at the end of the BAS period. You have to submit a BAS, which tells the ATO the GST you've collected and the GST that you've paid. The difference between the two is what you pay the tax office. So it depends on how you're registered as to how frequently you need to do a BAS and when you need to report and when you need to pay. That is another very big question for your accountant. Make sure that you're set up properly according to what your income is. It depends on your level of income as to how frequently you need to report. If you're a multinational $1 million business, then you need to report much more frequently than a small business does.
Yeah, definitely, yep.
Because the ATO wants to collect that money. They don't want you to be racking up debts. So that's an important point to note. The reporting period is normally once a quarter, every 3 months, and that's fairly typical for small business. Keep a close eye on your reporting and due dates for GST. Now, the ATO treats a BAS debt the same way as it does a tax debt, an income tax debt. It's very serious, and you need to keep on top of it. You need to keep on top of those dates. Constantly lodging and paying your BAS a few days late is a red rag to a bull. It's one of those flags that go up with the ATO, and it could mean you end up with a full-blown audit. Don't do it. But the good news in all of this, you're all freaking out because you're going, oh my God, I have to start paying the ATO every quarter. The good news about this is that if you have a very big BAS bill, example, you suddenly triple the amount that you earn in one quarter, and you know that it's coming, always get in the habit of lodging your BASs a few days, even a week early. And that's a good idea to do that, because if you suddenly lodge it and you go, oh my God, that's triple what I normally have to pay, you can actually set up a payment plan with the ATO.
Okay, right.
They're very flexible with this, and incredibly so.
Well, I think that if they want your money, they're gonna
exactly.
be very flexible.
Well,
yes,
exactly.
Yeah.
And if you're doing this in advance of when the debt is due, and you're saying, listen, I can't fork out 20 grand immediately. Can I please split this over a 6-month period? And they will allow you to do that, which is great. For goodness sake, don't miss any of those payments.
No.
Don't default on any of those payments. Otherwise, all of a sudden you have to pay it all immediately. So don't miss any of those days. Do it a couple of days before each of those. Say you're doing it once a month on the first of the month, pay a couple of days before that each time, just to make sure that the fund's clear, or if there's a problem or
something
bounces back or
yeah,
something.
Yeah.
So that's a good way to keep on top of that. The other thing you need to remember is that once you have one of your BAS debts, because if, say, for example, you're paying them every quarter, and then you get another big one, you can't do another payment plan. You can only do a payment plan with BASs one at a time. You have to pay off one of them before you can set up another payment plan. Something to remember, because obviously these are not annual debts, these are quarterly debts.
Yep.
And if you're paying something over 6 months, you've got to remember the next one, you're going to have to be ready to pay up front. So how do you keep on top of that debt? Now, this is one of those cash flow questions for business. And what the ATO recommends, and a lot of good business in good business practice do, is they have a separate account that actually holds their GST. So every time they get paid for an invoice, they take that GST component, that 10%, and they put it into a separate account, and they never touch that account. Don't use it as cash flow. So that means that no matter what, you have that debt ready to pay and that amount ready to pay to the ATO as soon as the debt is due. And the other good thing is it's forced saving, of course. Along the way, you're going to be making purchases that have GST, and you'll be able to reduce your GST liability from the GST that you pay on those purchases, and you've got a little bit of extra cash there because you've put the full 10% away, but the amount that you paid on purchases for GST comes off that, so you've got a little bit of extra cash flow, which is nice at the end of each quarter. That's just good business practice. Now, in terms of registering, your bookkeeper, who should be registered with the Tax Practitioners Board, or the ATO, or your accountant, can register you for GST. You can also do it yourself by calling the ATO if you've got a spare 45 minutes up your sleeve. And then you get notified in writing when you're registered. Now, this is from the ATO website. You must register within 21 days of reaching the threshold. So you're keeping track, you've been very good, you're tracking how much you're earning, suddenly you hit 75,000, you do need to register straight away. You can choose to register for GST if you're below the threshold. Now, this is an interesting discussion, because if you're charging other businesses for your goods and services, they understand that you don't have GST as part of your income, as part of your invoices, so they don't claim the GST back. That's all very clear. But if your end clients are consumers, right? And you're toddling along, and your business is moving rather successfully, and your income is growing exponentially, and suddenly you hit 75K, you suddenly have to add 10% to those invoices. Now, consumers don't get to claim that GST back. So all of a sudden, you are immediately increasing your invoices by 10%, and you could lose customers over that.
Right.
So you need to consider that. How much is this really going to be pocket money? Is this only going to be 20 or 30K a year? Do you have big dreams of eventually earning a decent income from this business? Are you going to be invoicing out more than 75K? If you think that that might happen, and your end clients are consumers, talk to your accountant about this. But it's probably, it might be a good idea to start charging GST immediately from the word go. It means you need to start. If you're going to charge GST, you can't say, I'm going to keep the GST and I'm not going to tell anybody about it. You have to actually start doing BASs right from the word go. But to be honest, when you're setting up a business and you're setting up all your accounts and you're setting it, it's probably good practice to start. You don't want to have suddenly a change when you're really, really busy. Income suddenly exploded. I'm suddenly earning over 75K. Woohoo, isn't that great? I'm trying to service my clients, and now I need to implement a whole new accounting system and start doing BASs, which I don't understand.
So get onto it early and have a plan set up. Yeah,
particularly definitely. If your end clients are consumers, because you will maybe, likely, possibly lose customers if you suddenly start charging them more 10% more. And then you have to think to yourself, well, am I going to compete with those of people in my industry who don't charge GST, and I look like I'm more expensive? Because remember, the end consumer cannot claim back that GST. Right. Just something to think about if you haven't already in terms of your setup. Now, one last topic one last thing before we go to a break. Contractors and GST. So you own a business and suddenly you're getting very busy and you want to outsource some of the work to someone else who has an ABN. They may be a sole trader, and they're starting to send you invoices. Now, for the first important rule is you need to make sure that those invoices are tax compliant. So that little list I told you before about what is a valid tax invoice, go back every time you receive an invoice from those contractors, check it's correct. Check that they tell you whether or not they charge GST. They must have their ABN on there. They should have their contact details on it because it's just dumb not to. They need to have a date. It needs to say tax invoice, and they need to display whether or not they charge GST, or the GST line needs to be zero. This is really important because I, as a bookkeeper and as an admin consultant, so many times end up chasing contractors who may have done work 6-12 months ago who haven't sent a valid tax invoice. And it's just good business practice to be, pulling them up on it, but just making sure that they're giving you the information that you need so that you can properly claim that expense and properly claim the GST or lack thereof as part of your if you start claiming back GST on invoices for contractors who shouldn't be charging GST, you'll have to, maybe you'll have to get a refund from the, pay a refund back to the ATO. I'm not sure. But just do it right the first time, basically. So I'm just gonna let you all go and have a break because I'm sure your brains,
have a breather. Yes,
brains are all full. And let me just say while we're having a short sort of break is that this is definitely not everything you need to know about GST. Yep. This is not exhaustive. We can't cover it all in a half-hour program.
No.
So I'm just touching on a few things that I've noticed people have made errors with, and it's a good idea to research it further compared with what your actual business circumstances are. And of course, the most important person to talk to about that is your accountant. If you don't have an accountant and you might need to start charging GST, get one. Get one.
There you go. I'll tell you what, let's go to some community service announcements and then some music, and then we'll be back with Alexi Boyd, and she's going to be answering a couple of questions on the social media about the GST. You are listening to The Breakfast Date on Triple H 100.1 FM. And there you go. That was Chris Isaac with Baby Did a Bad Thing.
That's a good song to have, isn't it? I
like that. It is a nice song.
Don't miss your GST obligations or you'll do a bad
thing. Chris
Maybe
Isaac.
the ATO needs to have some advertising using that song.
There you go.
Bad thing.
It is Tuesday and we are doing Small Biz Matters with Alexi Boyd. And today we're talking all things GST. However, our disclaimer is we have to say go to an accountant because we're not the be-all. We're not the experts. Get to an accountant if you want I was going to say real advice, but we do give real advice. We are right. We try. All from the ATO website. So, Lexi, a question that I posed to you in the ad break was, why the $75,000 quota or limit.
Yeah, you have to be charging $75,000 income in order for it to be compulsory.
GST, yeah.
You can choose to do it before that, which is what we mentioned before the break. It actually used to be 50,000, and I think that it was just basically the ATO recognised that, or the powers that be recognised that it is actually a really massive admin thing to take on. You've got your BASs to do. You have to have proper reporting with your accounting mechanism. You can't just operate off Excel spreadsheets. You need to have something a bit more expensive, and all that admin time and money it costs. And I think they recognise that. So I'm not sure when it happened, but recently it did go up to 75,000. I don't really see them putting it up any further than that. That would just be too nice to small business. At least it is 75K rather than 50. And so that's just the figure you have to have in your head. And it's always been 10%. We were having a discussion during the break about the stupidity, if I can say that, about different...
You can say that.
I could say that. Different states in the US, for example, have their equivalent, which is VAT.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't know how you get your head around that, really.
You go...
10%'s a great number. For goodness sake, don't change it.
If you don't know, listeners, you go up to order a burger from, a fast food chain, and on the menu it says $10. Just say you get up to the counter, it might be $10.26 or something, and then in another state it might be $10.19. So
because they can't put the inclusive amount because. Maybe the VAT changes and flip-flops all the time, but it also changes depending on which state you're in, so they dare not. Oh, it must be so confusing.
It is very confusing. Especially but they do a good leave a penny, take a penny, leave a penny, which is a very nice thing where you've just got a spare change. So if you ever need some money, but you don't want to be digging. You don't want to be digging in there and paying for your whole meal.
Let's get rid of pennies.
Oh, we could talk about the American currency. Let's go back to GST. What questions were posed to you, Lexi?
Yeah, look, on my fabulous Facebook groups with my other small business colleagues, I like to call them. Typical questions. So a really good question and comes up quite a bit is GST on credit card purchases that you charge your customers. Great question. And this is the way the ATO answers it, which is it actually gives an example. So here's the example. Anastasia is in a store and decides to purchase a skirt. The skirt's price tag indicates the price is $55 inclusive of GST, and there's a sign on the counter saying a surcharge of 3% of the price will be imposed if a payment is made by a credit card. Anastasia decides to pay using a credit card. The merchant or the person selling it to her imposes a surcharge of $1.65 because that's what they said they were going to charge for the credit card surcharge. The price payable is now $56.65. Since the supply of the shirt is a taxable supply, so because the shirt is a GST payable item, then the surcharge therefore has GST on it too. So I hope that makes it clear. If you have GST applicable items in your store, then you have to charge GST on the credit card surcharge as well. So that's I'm not sure how that works with accounting systems and live merchant facilities, but there's an interesting way of getting an answer from the ATO. Here's another example. We sell our customers packing cartons, including GST, then buy them back from our customers after they've used them. So we sell them for one price and then we buy them back for a lower price. Do we claim GST on the purchase when buying them back? So here's an answer to this. Thank you to Julie Atwood, our resident fabulous accountant who's been on our show, who gave us the answer to this one. In this scenario, you can't claim back the GST because the person you're buying back the GST from is not registered for GST. So if they're a consumer and they give you back the cartons, they're not going to give you a tax invoice that says the GST component of those cartons coming back. They're not registered for GST. Therefore, you can't claim back the GST on that particular purchase back into the business. But if you were to set up this transaction as a refund, then the GST would be cancelled out. So it's just the way that you set these things up in your business. So consider that when you are doing things. And that's a big thing to remember when you are dealing with businesses, contractors, smaller home-based businesses that do not charge and are not registered for GST. You can't then claim for GST because they're not charging you for it. It's really just, putting money into the hat of the ATO and then taking it back out again, and you work out what the difference is. If you can get your head around that, then it does make it a little bit clearer. Somebody did pose a question on one of those groups about Bitcoin. Now, this is a really interesting one because it's becoming a currency. It's becoming a reality in terms of purchasing and that sort of thing. The ATO on its website has got a press release, which it released only in last October, to actually give a definitive answer to people asking questions about Bitcoin. If you go to the ATO website and you type in Bitcoins and GST into their search function, which is actually a half decent search function, you can find that press release and it actually gives you a definitive answer. I'm not going to say what the answer is because I don't want to interpret something incorrectly and then you then make a financial decision based on that. But please go to the ATO website and type it in. Quite a number of occasions, it's very easy to find these answers out on the ATO. The ease of finding them isn't too bad. The difficulty of understanding what the hell they've written, that's another thing altogether. So if you can wade your way through the financial spiel and trying to understand what they're trying to get across to everyday consumers and businesses, good luck to you. Again, if you're confused about something and it impacts on your business and the way that you registered or not registered or comply or don't comply, check with your accountant or get on the phone to the business help line on the ATO. If you've got a spare 45 minutes, put them on hold, listen to the fabulous background music, get on with other work when they answer. Also, just a little tip in terms of dealing with the ATO. If you get any advice from the ATO, obviously it's official advice because it's coming from them. Write down the person's name you spoke to, the date, the time, and ask them where they are based. Because if you speak to someone called Kate, I bet you there's more than one Kate in the ATO. So say, Kate, which phone room are you in? And she should say Brisbane or Las Vegas or Philippines, or wherever the hell she is. As long as you know where she is, you can write it down and then you've got a record. And remember, that is a legal record of something you've been given advice about. So make sure you write it down who you speak to. I have a little book. It's a little exercise book.
Yep.
Every time I ring any organisation, anything, like any organisation at all, and I'm getting advice about the goods that they've sold me or the things that I haven't received or me whinging to a bank. You can imagine how good I am at whinging to a bank. Everything's written down and it is golden, because when you can ring up a large telecommunications provider and say to them, I spoke to this person, this person, this person, this person on this time, this time, this time, on this date, this date, this date. And this is what each of them said. Do you have that record? Because I've got it written down in front of me. It really scares the pants off them.
I was about to say, that's my worst habit. I never seem to get the name. I know.
Must. And there's no excuse now because you have this little device in your pocket called a phone, which has a little application called Notes in it.
Just even scribble it down on a bit of paper because it is so crucial.
No, don't scribble down a piece of paper. That'll get lost. Put it in your phone or something, or have a beautiful exercise book that has...
Oh, you're so prepared, Lexi.
Well, it's my job.
Very nice.
So, moving on to... You've just found out that you're going to be starting to charge GST coming the new financial year. First tip, very important. Once you start charging GST, you need to get a decent accounting software package. It could be Xero, it could be MyOb, could be QuickBooks. Get something that can handle the GST properly, because there are various elements of running a business that do have GST included, and there's some that when you receive a bill from an insurance company, for example, this is a really good example because people get this wrong all the time. So I've got my car insurance coming in, and my car is a 100% deductible expense. I've already established that with my accountant through one of the methods of claiming a motor vehicle. I've determined that it's 100% deductible. I receive my insurance. Now, don't just bung in your accounting software car insurance. First of all, you should always write down which car it is, because you might have several cars. And maybe even if you're really, really anal like me, you actually write down the start date and end date of the policy and the policy number, just so you've got a record of that in your accounting system. But not every item within that insurance policy actually has GST as part of it. Your policy does, but the stamp duty does not. Right, so you have to split it into separate lines. So the policy will have the GST code. The stamp duty will have GST free or no tax or one of the GST free expense codes. Then when you get to the bottom, you check that the amount of the bill is exactly the same as what you've got in your accounting software, but you also check the GST amount is the same as what you've got in your accounts. So that is an example of where a bill has certain components which are GST inclusive and GST free. And you need to make sure that that bill, for example, is always entered correctly. A lot of my clients don't seem to get that correct. And remember that if you're paying these insurance policies monthly, you need to split all of those lines into 12 monthly payments. So that the stamp duty per month, because you're paying it monthly, needs to be divided into 12, and that component therefore doesn't have GST divided by 12. I hope that makes sense, because I may have just confused myself with what I was trying to explain.
I think it made sense.
Yeah,
I know what you were getting.
Water is another example of something that's GST free. Okay, so nobody pays GST on water.
Thank heavens, yes.
Yes, and if you buy milk for your business, or fresh fruit and vegetables, for some reason, if that's a deductible expense, then those items don't have GST either. Okay, so just check the receipt, and that's why you keep receipts for everything. Then you can check that the GST adds up. It's a very important part of getting in the habit of entering data correctly. So just moving back to what we were talking about earlier in the show about contractors and making sure that you're entering them correctly into your account system. And this is a good habit to do right from the beginning. So when new contractors come on board with your business, you should check their ABN on the ABN Lookup website. Very simple to find. Just Google ABN Lookup. It's a really great little tool. I actually have it constantly on my web browser, because I'm always checking that contractors are doing the right thing. You type in their ABN, which should be at the top of their tax invoice. If it's not, ask them for it. Do not pay them unless their tax invoice is correct, because if they're charging you GST and they're not registered for GST, that's not right. Or if they're not charging you but they are registered, that's not right either. So if you could just make it a habit that when you get a tax invoice from a contractor for the first time, you do the ABN lookup. You type in their ABN, you determine whether or not they're registered for GST, and you make sure that their tax invoice is correct while you're doing it. Then when you're adding them into your account software, you build what's called a contact card, a supplier card. You put in their name, you put in their address, you put in all their details depending on how detailed you want to be, but you must always put in their ABN. And look, I'm pretty anal. I put in everything that I can find on that invoice the first time when I set them up properly. But a lot of the accounts software allows you to determine for every purchase you receive from that supplier, that contractor, that they are GST free. And this is a really handy thing to do when you have overseas suppliers as well. So every time you receive a tax invoice from them and you are putting it in as a bill from a contractor or an overseas supplier, every time your accounts software will remember not to add GST to that. It'll always be zero. So you've told it that from now on, whenever you add an invoice from that contractor or supplier, this GST is zero. So you don't accidentally end up with a GST component on that invoice when you're entering the data. It's a really important thing to set up these contractors and these overseas suppliers correctly in your account system. A lot of the accounts software are very handy, have this little tool where you can apply a particular category or a code into that particular supplier. So a particular contractor does software development, for example. They always do software development. That's the only thing they're going to supply you with. So you can put it to that account code. Whenever an invoice comes in, it will automatically go to software development. I will automatically not be seeing any GST on their invoice, and that's how my account system will remember it. So little tips and tricks that you can do to set yourself up correctly to make sure that when you're receiving those bills, it's a faster process. And that's really, at the end of the day, it seems like a bit of money to fork out, and actually not so much the money to fork out for these accounts software, but the time that it takes to learn it. But at the end of the day, you're not just learning how to do your accounts properly, but you're actually learning about your business. You're learning how to do your business better and how to do your back end better. So it does take time, and time is money, so don't necessarily waste time researching things that you don't know how to do. Ask for advice from people around you, or like-minded businesses, or people who are experiencing the same difficulty, or research it online, or ask your accountant. But try and get these things set up properly in the first place, because in the long run, it will save you time. If you just put in these contact cards with as many details as you possibly can, then the account software will remember that. Definitely. So that's what you've just got to remember. When it comes to GST and entering the data, obviously there's a myriad of things, but when it comes to bills coming in, make sure the bill's correct. Add that supplier or contractor in as a specific in a specific way, so that your account system remembers it the next few times that you enter the bill, and then it enables you to report it correctly at the end. So setting yourself up properly in the first place is always a good idea.
Very, very critical to all business matters, really.
Well, it is. I mean, that's the thing.
Be
when
prepared.
Payroll and and inducting staff for the first time, and all the pinch points really for business where they are not compliant and they haven't been from the beginning, because in the beginning when they were trying to do something massive like hiring staff for the first time or starting to charge GST or some other big change, they didn't research it properly and they didn't figure out how to do it properly. And that's going to cost you a fortune in the long run, because your bookkeeper or your accountant has to unravel all of the mistakes that you've made. Another classic mistake.
I bet they love that.
Oh yeah. Well, another classic mistake is just paying super incorrectly.
Yep.
It's 9.5%. And just not calculating it right, or just going, oh, I'm scared that I'm not going to be compliant, so I'm just going to throw money at somebody's super fund, and it's wrong. And then you go, but I don't want to overpay them. Well, you have overpaid them. And imagine the cost of and the time it takes to extract that money back out of a super fund and allocate it either to the right person or to the right time period. Just get it right the first time. And spending a few dollars by getting the advice to make sure you've done it right the first time. And like I say with everything, if someone gives you great advice and you're thinking, I'm doing it now and then I'm going to do it again in 3 months or a year, write it down.
Yep.
Write it down. Make sure you get it right and then go, right, okay, I figured out, I was taught something. I'm going to write it down because my memory is shot. And in a year's time, I'm not going to remember what that person said. And I want to remember what they said and I want to get it right again. So write it down. Have a tips and tricks little folder in your back-end admin section of your business on your computer. Somebody told me this, blah. So, yeah.
Oh, well, it's a great idea. And also, just keep a record of it because, like you said, we've all got botchy memories and everything like that. And there's a lot of work to be done when setting up a business and whatever else. So.
There is. Getting it set up properly is crucial.
Crucial. I'll tell you what, Lexi, we've almost gone over time.
We have.
A 30-minute show and you're pushing it out to 50.
I can talk underwater every
No,
day.
it is awesome. Lexi, as always, thank you for Small Biz Matters on Tuesday. Can you give us a little sneak peek as to next week?
We're going to start touching on legal matters. In a couple of weeks' time, we've got the wonderful Ursula Hogben, who is a North Shore business mum and heads up Legal Vision, which is a great company. Can't speak highly enough of them. Probably shouldn't advertise them too heavily. But they're great little business for small to medium-sized businesses to help you out with legal matters. And Ursula's going to come on the show in a few weeks' time. So we're going to have a couple of shows leading up to that about legal matters. Not that I'm a lawyer, not an expert, not legal,
an accountant, not a lawyer.
What am I? I have to have that sort of philosophical discussion with myself.
What are you? A consultant, aren't you?
I am. I'm a consultant, admin consultant.
There you go.
Have yet to meet another admin consultant. If there are any admin consultants out there, come and see me because I need a network.
Yeah, you need a mate. No. Very good. Thank you, Lexi, for your time. It has been as entertaining as always. And Small Biz Matters as for next week, 9 o'clock on a Tuesday.